This is Christina Shala, and welcome to another episode of Empowering the Educator Within. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at strategies for teaching academic language to your intermediate and advanced level ELL students. Before exploring different teaching strategies, it's first important to understand what academic language is. Academic language can be categorized into three tiers. The first being informal common vocabulary, the second being general academic. The question that I often get asked is, why do I need to focus on teaching academic language to my intermediate and advanced level ELL students? They seem to be coping in class just fine. They're understanding directions, they're able to complete tasks, that may very well be that they're sort of getting by, but I can tell you from firsthand that they do need that extra support. For me, growing up, I followed the French immersion program from kindergarten until grade 9, and then transitioned to the English stream when I was in grade 10. And so all that academic vocabulary that I learned in math, social, and science, etc., that was all in French. And so when I hit the English stream and the teachers started throwing out terms in English, a lot of the times I actually didn't know what they were talking about. And it's not something that the teachers would have thought, just because conversationally, I speak English just fine. And so this is what's happening for a lot of your intermediate and advanced level ELL students. While they may seem fine, they may have friends, and they may be well adapted in your class, there's still a lot of learning gaps, and you do need to cover academic language with them and give them that extra support in these areas. You've got an understanding of why it's important to teach academic language to your intermediate and advanced level students. Let's take a look at the difference. I like to think of receptive language as input language because it's the way that students are absorbing and As for productive language, or as I like to call it, output language, these are the ways that students demonstrate to help guide you with your planning. Even though you are working with your intermediate and advanced level students, you're still going to need, before getting into the different teaching strategies for Tier 2 vocabulary words, I just want to clarify the difference between the Tier 2 vocabulary words that I was referring to for beginner ELLs, if you watch that video, and for the more intermediate advanced level students that I'm referring to in this video. So for beginner ELLs, the Tier 2 type words that you were looking for were words that were, yes, subject specific, but they may cross over multiple subject areas, and they were simple, basic. For example, if you were teaching solar systems, you might want to pull out words like sun, moon, star. But now that your students are moving more into the intermediate advanced level category, you need to increase the difficulty of the words that you're selecting. And so, as I mentioned in another video, if you were to type in Tier 2 vocabulary words on the internet, you'd find lists of words that teachers have already kind of put together for ELL students that you can use as a starting base. And these words, you'll notice, are a little bit more subject specific, and there are also perhaps words with multiple meanings, and they would be things like compare, differ, avoid. Again, things that they may see in a certain subject area, but also might cross over into multiple subject areas. Now that you've got an understanding of the types of Tier 2 academic language that should be focused on with your intermediate and advanced level students, what are some reading strategies that you can use? Well, first and foremost, what I consider to be the most important would be pre-teaching the vocabulary before a unit starts. So pulling, 15, 20 words, having the students practice them maybe a few days or a week in advance, just so they get a jump start before the unit starts. Always helpful. Giving students word lists and word sort activities, mix and match activities where they have the words and the definitions and they've got to mix and match between them. Providing students with lots of visuals to accompany the text, charts, diagrams, anything really where your ELL students can sort of look to reinforce what it is that they're reading, the meaning of what it is that they're reading. Providing your ELLs with a simpler version of the text than the rest of the class. So really taking a look at the types of Tier 2 vocabulary that you want to teach and make sure that the text that you're giving them has a lot of those words within it. And then also pointing out text features like headings and subheadings to your ELL students, just so that they have sort of a starting point to get a better idea of the context of what it is that they're reading. Also helpful. The strategies that I'm going to share for Tier 2 academic language for listening more so apply to your intermediate students rather than your advanced, just because your advanced are further along in their language skills. So different ways that your intermediates can practice some of that academic language would be to listen to multi-step instructions and see if they can follow along. You might also need to source some audio materials in their native language or mother tongue just to help them in understanding some of that academic language that you're using. It's helpful if they hear it first in their language and then in English. And then lastly, this is similar to what I suggested for the beginner ELLs, is preparing some flashcards using Quizlet or quizzes and adding the audio to go along with, just so that they can start hearing some of that pronunciation for Tier 2 academic words. So some different things that you can do to help your intermediate and advanced level ELLs integrate some of that academic Tier 2 language into their writing would be to offer them sentence starters, especially helpful maybe for your intermediate students who may need that little extra push. Modeling compound sentences for them or longer sentences so that they have a base point to work from. Giving them graphic organizers to help them structure their writing. Giving them word work to help build that bank of high frequency and subject specific academic vocabulary is also helpful. Spelling activities and spelling tests to help them, start learning the different spellings of some of those harder vocabulary words. And also just some simple one-off grammar activities whenever you notice that there's an area that they can improve upon. As for speaking, different things that you can do are again to provide sentence starters, which, as I mentioned before, are especially helpful for your intermediate students when they're engaging in speaking activities. You can also provide them with a word bank of high frequency and subject specific words that you would like them to use during group discussions. And also, if you ever have the opportunity to put them, with a partner or group of 3 or 4, giving them discussion cards on different topics that you're covering in class also gives them a way to practice some of that academic vocabulary with their peers. So now we're moving on to the Tier 3 subject-specific, precise academic language that pertain to single subject areas. Now, this is language that students would not necessarily use in everyday conversation, but they are going to need to know in order to understand what they're reading in social, math, science. And so for me, when I was growing up, This would have been the extra support that I would have needed in grade 10 when I was being presented with these types of academic words and me not being able to understand what they meant just because I had learned them all in French. So for these students, different things that you can do for intermediate and advanced level ELLs would again to be pre-teach the vocab, pull out key words that you feel the students would need to know in order to better understand the information they're being presented with. And if you didn't want to be pre-teaching and pulling the words yourself, you could also give the students the text and they can go through it in advance and highlight words that they're not understanding and sort of create a dictionary or a word bank for themselves, just so that by the time you start the unit, they sort of have a better understanding of what's coming. Also, giving these students text with extra visuals is helpful, as well as charts and diagrams to go along with as well to help them solidify their understanding. By the time you get to covering and teaching Tier 3 academic vocabulary, your students are probably far enough along that in terms of listening, they won't need to listen to the words in their native tongue. So you could probably get by just by speaking in English, and now you're going to be encouraging the students to follow multi-step and complex directions. And also note-taking activities are also great for building some of the listening skills for your intermediate and advanced level students, because they need to focus on what you're saying, absorb the information, and then write down what they hear. In terms of encouraging your intermediate and advanced level ELL students to use the subject-specific and academic language that you're teaching in their writing, there are many different strategies that you can use. The first being providing them with word banks of the subject-specific and academic words that you would like to see in their writing pieces. You can also have them creating word webs play around with the vocabulary that they're learning. Word logs or dictionaries are also great, but now that they're more intermediate and advanced, they can take the words, they can try and find synonyms, antonyms, write sentences using these words within their logs or dictionaries. And really, the more different ways that they can practice the vocabulary, the better the chance that they retain the words for future use. You can also have students looking at prefixes, suffixes, again, playing around with finding synonyms and antonyms for the different words that they're learning. Grammar activities, quick hits if you notice that they're maybe having difficulties in certain areas. Spelling practice never hurts, especially now that you're introducing higher level and more complicated vocabulary. And lastly, editing activities. So giving them paragraphs where there are mistakes with the subject-specific and academic vocabulary words and seeing if they can figure out where they are and correct them. Similar to the speaking activities that I suggested for Tier 2 vocabulary, Tier 3 again is going to be challenging students to use that subject-specific and academic language during group discussions. And so you might want to give them, again, a word bank to use and say, these are the expectations. I'd like you to choose, maybe 10 out of the 20 words on this list to use while discussing the topic with your group, or in your presentation that you'll be doing for the class. When it comes to evaluating your intermediate and advanced level students' progress in terms of language, you're going to use a combination of your ELL matrix, or the standards that you've been given by your school, and your language curriculum. And the reason for this is that most likely, even though your students are at the intermediate and advanced level, they're still not at grade level in many of the areas for language arts. And so in those areas where they may not be there quite yet, you can supplement with your ELL matrix standards. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Empowering the Educator Within. Join us next time to learn tips for teaching academic content to your intermediate and advanced level ELL students. See you next time.